In this lesson, I want to add form validation to this HTML form. So typically you might see a form and you see that it's just got its post so you can submit, and sometimes you might see an event listener, an attribute event listener here where you've got something like on submit and then it calls to a function. So we're not going to touch any of that HTML and we're going to do all of our functionality right within JavaScript. So the first thing that we need to do is make our selection, and we've given the form an ID, so we can do document get element by ID, because of course this is the easiest way to make our selection via the ID. And we're going to make a selection of the form, and we're also going to do the submit button as well, so the my form. So that's the element that we're going to get, and then the listener that we're going to replace on it is going to be on submit. And then whenever that submit is fired off, whenever that is triggered, we're going to run through this function. So here I'm going to just build out that function. So maybe what we want to do, so we want to eliminate, first of all, we want to eliminate that default action. So whenever I click this send button, what's going to actually happen is that it's just going to simply submit the form. So I want to eliminate that, and we can eliminate this by doing a return false. So now when I go back out here and when I refresh, so we see that nothing is happening, and that's because we've brought this in, we've got the event listener on here on submit, and when it fires off, we're just returning false. So essentially what that means is nothing gets submitted. So the next item that we want to look at is we want to look at the submit button, and we want to add in some additional functionality there as well. And of course we could do it in a number of ways. So maybe if we wanted to, and again we're going to use get element by ID, and we're going to select via the ID, so submit button, and then this one we're going to just do a simple on click. So whenever it gets clicked, we're going to fire off maybe our validation, so check form, and create a function down here to actually check through the form. So we're going to go down here and do function check form, and then maybe we'll just console log out for now, or I'm going to create another div here. And I'm just going to give it an ID of output so that we can actually output some content in here. And I'm going to assign variable output. So output is going to be my container for the document get element by ID, and this time we're selecting that output element. So whenever we check the form, whenever we click this button, we're going to update output, and we're going to update that inner HTML and equal it to clicked. So that this way we don't have to open up the console, and just going to make things a lot more visible, easier to see. So we see that now whenever we click it, we get clicked, and we're actually firing off both of these, because by default this button over here we actually submit the form, and over here where we're actually submitting the form we've got a return of false. So we have two options here which we can do now. We can either go with this to validate and check the form, or we could do this one to validate and check the form. And I'm going to go back to the form up here, because what I want to do is I want to have the ability to do a condition here. I want to check through a bunch of the values here within the form, pick them up and make a quick check on them and see if they're valid, if they're going to meet my requirements. So I want to keep all of this within that same function. So I could realistically, I could just link to this function as well to check form. So I could do either one of those, and I could even just remove this click off the button. So there's a few different options here, but for now I'm just going to leave it like this, and I'm going to start hooking up all of the different elements that I want to interact with. So the first one that I want to interact with is the name element. So I'm going to assign a brand new variable, access that element from the HTML, and again, this is going to be get element by ID, and the ID of the name is name. So really straightforward there, and I'm going to just duplicate this so for all the other two elements that I have there, and I'm going to beautify it so that aligns them all really nicely. So this one, the second one, maybe we can do my email, and the third one will be my MES for the message. And now we just need to set up those IDs. So MSG there for the message, and just mail for the email address. Now with HTML5, the really good thing about it is that if this isn't a valid email in here, it's actually not going to submit. So if I have something like this, and just let me refresh that, and I just realized that I have the type as text. So I had done that on purpose for the purposes of this demonstration, because when I have it as an email, and if I try to fill out something that's not an email, HTML5 has this default pop-up message. And of course you can rely on that, or you can take it one step further and build out your own validation. So I'm going to go ahead and build out my own validation. So for the validation of the email, I've just got a quick function I'm going to copy and paste in here. And essentially what this function is going to do is that it's going to check, it's going to take in this value of the email, and it's going to do a check. So it's going to check to see if it matches all of this criteria. So essentially what this is saying is that it allows any type of content. We're looking for the @ symbol, and we're allowing numbers, characters, and then we're looking for a dot, and then some numbers and characters as well. So this accounts for various formats of email addresses, and essentially as long as it's a valid email address. And what we're returning over here is the results of the test. So if the my check is valid, then it's going to come back true, and if it's not, then it's going to come back false. And we can work that into our logic here at the top when we do a quick check to see our submission process. So the first one that I want to check for is my name, and in order to get the value of my name, I just type in value. So I'm going to do a quick check to see if it's equal to blank, because we don't want to have any blank submissions. And if it is equal to blank, then I need to create another variable here. So this is just going to be a blank variable, and I'm going to use this as a container to fill this up, and then I'm going to do my check on that to see if there's any value within this container. So I'm going to just do our message and give it a value of name not filled out. And I also want to do the exact same thing for the other values that I have within my form. For some reason I was having some difficulty there making the selection. So this was just beautifying it, and I need to update these to match with what my selections are here up here. And instead of name, I'm going to do email not filled out and message not filled out, and save that. And now I can go over here, and one of the problems that I'm looking at right now is that I'm not doing a message equals message. So we need to concatenate these together. So this is in case we have multiple messages that we want to output. And I'm also going to add in some HTML so that we actually have these on new lines that gets output. And what we're going to do now as well is we're going to get rid of this one here, and we're going to update the inner HTML with the message. So let's just do a quick check and see what happens. So we see now when we fill out the name, then that one disappears. We see that the email and then the message, and then we should be able to set the form to submit if we don't have anything within our message. So that's the next piece of logic that we can add in. And there's also one more thing here that we can add in, so one more validation. So we're going to just separate this out, and I'm going to do a check to see if it's a valid email. So if it's a valid email, then it's so we want it to fire off if it's not being returned as true, and we want the message to take place. So this is kind of like one of those double negatives where I've got a no and I'm looking for a false. So there's a number of different ways to write this, but for now we're just going to do it within this type of format, so not valid email. So I'm going to add that into the message string, and we'll just refresh that, and we see that. So something there has gone wrong, so just got to do a quick check, and I can see that I forgot one of the brackets there. And so now we see that we've got our not valid email firing off. One more quick piece to this puzzle, and what we want to do is we actually want to do another condition here, and we're just going to check to see if there's any contents in our message. And the way that we can do that is we can check for the length of it. So if the length is greater than 0, then what we're going to do is we're going to output this message here, and also we're going to return false. But if we don't have any errors that we've thrown, so then we can do an else here, and we can return true. So let me just beautify it to make everything aligned, save it, and now we'll test it out. So we first try to set it. We see we've got 4 things that we need to fill out here. So once I start filling out the name, that one disappears. The email disappears, but we're still not valid. So if I do a valid email address, then we see that when we try to submit that. So I got to take another look at this and see. So I don't actually need to have this part in here. So we'll try this one more time. So we put in a valid email address. So now all we need to do is fill out the message. So when we fill out the message, then we're ready to go and we complete the submission process. And I don't have anything at form PHP, that's why it's giving me that object not found. But this essentially is how you can really quickly use DOM and selection of your HTML elements in order to build out your validation check on your form within your HTML code.